Welcome back to Logical Fallacies, Part 2. In this part, we're going to look at 4 more types of logical fallacies that you want to be able to know and identify and avoid in your own writing. In our first section, we explained what a logical fallacy is, and we looked at the first 4. In this video, we'll look at 4 more. Let's get started. Our 5th logical fallacy is weak analogy. And this is comparing two things that are not alike in all aspects, but assuming they're more alike than they are. Let me give you an example. Just like the Nazi concentration camps, in which the weak of society were exterminated, the anti-immigration policy of the government is putting refugees in holding centers. Now, this is a weak analogy because we're comparing two things that really are only a little bit alike. On one hand, we've got the concentration camps of the Nazi regime in which they knowingly exterminated people. And then we have, on the other hand, the policy of a government that puts refugees in holding centers. And it's true, those holding centers might not be pleasant. And by no means am I supporting that idea. But to compare a concentration camp in which people are being exterminated to a holding center where even if it's crowded, we can't really take it to that same level of comparison. That's what we would call a weak analogy. It's like saying an apple is equal to an orange when it's really not. This type of analogy, weak analogy, is often used and it's exaggerated to make people see worst-case scenarios and to strengthen arguments that really actually are not very logical. Be careful of weak analogies. It's tempting to use a weak analogy for a good cause. For example, if I want to help correct a policy of anti-immigration that's really unbalanced, I could draw a weak analogy between horrible things and that policy. But that in the end is not really going to get where I want to go. I need to instead use a proper logical argument to get my readers and my listeners to the place where they're convinced of what I'm saying. Another type of logical fallacy is called the appeal to popularity, or sometimes we call this the bandwagon approach, or getting on the bandwagon. And it basically says, everyone's doing it, therefore it must be right. You'll find this in arguments all over the place. For example, more and more countries are refusing entry to migrants, so why shouldn't we? What's the logic behind that? Well, the only logic really you can say is, well, everyone else is doing it, therefore it must be right. This goes back to the thing we always would talk about with peer pressure, for example, in school, where somebody says, everyone else is doing it, so you should do it. Well, that's just peer pressure. And on a logical level, it's the equivalent of a kind of a brainless peer pressure. Since everyone else is doing it, therefore it must be right. Watch out for this one. You'll find it in all kinds of cases. Even in advertising, we'll hear many things often like, more and more people are using toothpaste brand X. Well, just because more and more people are using it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a good thing to do. Number 7, the appeal to authority. This is a type of argument where a person refers to another person with authority on the subject as being the evidence for their argument. So, for example, all of the leading experts say that immigrants are good for the country, so we should definitely remove restrictions on those who want to come. Now, on a personal level, I'm generally in favor of removing restrictions on immigration. However, just the fact that supposed leading experts say it, that's an appeal to authority. It's not a logical argument that really can stand in the face of anybody actually trying to look deep into the logic of it. It's an unsubstantiated argument that refers to, quote, all the leading experts, unquote. You'll find often with an appeal to authority that the actual authority being appealed to might or might not really have that strong level of authority that it seems like when you first look at it. And so that leads us to realize that appeals to authority can have varying levels of strength. Some of them can be very fallacious, meaning that they can be a strong logical fallacy, whereas others might be less so. They might actually have some substance to them, and it really depends on what authority is being appealed to. So appealing to authority properly, where you bring in an outside source that's credible, that has a strong ethos, and that helps build your sense of ethos in your writing, your appeal to ethos, that can be a strong and viable argument and a logical one. But appealing to authority just for authority's sake and appealing to questionable sources of authority, that becomes a logical fallacy. And number 8 is called the appeal to ignorance. In this type of argument, we say, well, there's no conclusive evidence against my argument, therefore, it should be accepted. Basically, if a person puts out there an argument that really can't be proven wrong, then they say, see, you can't prove my argument wrong, therefore I must be right. That doesn't quite work logically. Here we go. No one has ever come up with proof that multiculturalism does not work. Therefore, we should become a multicultural society. Well, is multiculturalism something you can prove doesn't work? Or is it one of those complex issues that you have to really weigh lots of evidence on both sides? And maybe at that point you would have a viable argument. But simply to say that nobody's proven it wrong, therefore we should, become a multicultural society, that's really not logical. As much as I like multicultural societies, I can't really say that that's a logical argument in favor of it. So beware of the appeal to ignorance. Remember, just saying something can't be disproven doesn't mean that it can be proven. If I tell you that I'm an alien in human form, well, you're not really going to be able to disprove that. That doesn't automatically mean it's right. Although you never know.